kind of features that need to be implemented, and you can document that in the user story format, and you can do that in the use case diagram format, right? So these are about documenting the requirements. Now, once we talk about the documentation, then we also talk about the design. So the design that we're talking about was using the UML class diagram in order to identify the classes and the members of the classes. So we looked at some examples before. So let me just show you very quickly again. Now I'll share some of these files with you so you can have a look at that again later on. So this is the one that we mentioned earlier. So a calculator class with a few fields, and then we have the methods, and some of the methods will be public and the other will be private. Now we talk about the suitability of defining the save method in this class, right? So if we add the save method in the calculator class, the class is not going to be highly cohesive anymore. So the best thing to do is to separate that into another class so we can reuse the save method in order to save the information of different objects. So that is what we are going to do. Now, our implementation is going to start from creating a calculator class, and then we are going to define the fields, and then 3 methods. So 2 private and 1 public. So are we ready? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay, so let's create a new project, guys. So we'll be using Windows Form application. So the same type of project as usual. Okay. Alright, so please make sure you choose the right project and the right language here. So it's a C# Windows Form app. So click next, and we are going to store the information. So let's say I'll put that in my C drive, Shanti. Okay. Right, so I call this as my calculator. My Kili calculator. Okay, so you can use the same the same project, or you can use a different name, right? So it's up to you. So click next, and then we are using the latest .NET version, of course. Click create. Okay. Now, in the object-oriented way of creating your solution, we always start from creating the classes, right? So how do we add a class?
Right here, just right click on the namespace, I believe.
Yeah. So what do we call this again? In the Solution Explorer window?
Project.
Project. So we right click the project and then add, and then class. Very good. Okay, so usually we want to make that to a public class, so we change that later on. So what is the name of my class? According to the class diagram. Calculator, yeah? Okay, so if you have the class diagrams, in order to specify the class diagram, you have to use the same names as the ones specified in the diagrams, right? So the class name is calculator in the diagram, so we have to use the same name. Right, so I'm going to make this into a public class. So in order to define the fields, I can also use the automatic properties command. So let's do the automatic properties here. So how many properties do we need to define? According to the class diagram before? Yeah. 4. Okay, so look at the data type for each one as well. And then we are going to define the properties. Okay, so how do we define an automatic property? Prog. And then cat. Right, so what is the type of the first property? Yeah, so int, and then the name is first one. Yeah.
We also have to give options to use decimal points like the number. So we have to use.
No, we don't have to. So that is some for the requirements that you want to confirm. Yeah. So sometimes you need to check that. Alright, so do we need to define second num as well? Yeah. Okay, so what is the next one?
Result.
After the second num, what do we have to define? Is that result yet?
Oh wait,
Put that on the
it's
side.
operator.
The operator.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What is the data type?
Character.
Are they supposed to be private?
Yeah. So we make them public.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Because the field will be private, but the properties will be public.
Other
right?
properties.
Okay. So one more that we have to define here. So what is that again? Result. Good. Okay. Alright, so these are the 4 properties that we define. Remember again, we are using automatic properties, and that means the fields will be created during runtime, right? And we don't have access to the fields data during the design time. So when we write in the code, we cannot access the fields because they are not created yet. Okay, so that will be my properties, and then let's define the methods first. Right, so we talk about the 3 different methods again, and one of them is a public method and the other 2 are private methods. Let's start with the private methods. How do I define a private method? Private? Okay. And what is the purpose of the add method? The add? To add 2 numbers. And what do we want to do with the result? Good. So are we going to return or are we going to store the results somewhere? Store it. Yeah. So why do we store this time?
Because you don't want to display it.
Yeah.
Oh.
You store it as a result?
Yeah. Good.
I'm quite curious because like we need to return results to display it to the student.
Okay. So we'll talk about how we can do it without returning. Yeah. So in some cases, remember again, this is what we call as a design. So the way that you design the class can be different from one person to the next person. So the method that you have, in order to do the calculation, it could return the result of the calculation. So that means you're going to return using the return statement, or you can actually store the result in the field of the class, right? Yep, so you have to set that. Very good. Now, because we don't have access to the field, so how do we store the result in this case?
We use a property.
Use the property. Very good. So the property is then going to store the value to the field, right? Okay, good. So in this case, I want to be able to add the 2 numbers and then store the result into the result field. So what is the return type? Void. Very good. And then what is the name of the method? Add. Yeah, or we can just say add. And then do we have to pass any value in order to do the calculation? Yes.
First number and second number property.
Okay. So do we need to declare the parameters here, or do we have access to the first num and the second num in the class?
Access.
We do have access, right? So the only time that you need to declare parameters is when you need to get additional information that is not within the class yet. So in this case, we know the first num, we know the second num, because they're all defined as the properties here, right? So you don't have to pass anything.
So what's the property is private?
Yeah. So the fields are private. So the way that you implement from the class diagram to your code, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So if you look at the private field there, does it mean that you always have to define the field and then you create the properties, or you don't need to create properties, right? So the interpretation is up to the developer. So in this case, we just create the automatic properties. Yeah. Okay. So let's complete this one, guys. So what will happen again in the body here?
Result equal first num plus second num.
Okay, so results equal to first num plus second num. Is that right? Okay, is that all that we want to do?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if that's setting it though.
Is that going to set that? Very good. So we can check that using a breakpoint later on, right? We always have to test our class. Okay, so let's try to implement the other 2 and then we can test them. Alright, so guys, let's create the second method here. So the second one will be very similar, isn't it? So subtract, and then what do we do? Use the minus operator, is that right? Okay, now, so the next method that I want to create, remember again, according to my class diagram, there is one method called calculate. So this is the method that we want to make as public. So this method, it doesn't have any return value as well. So the purpose of this method is to call the right method in order to aid us with the calculation. So which method do we want to call depending on the operator, right? So let's add the name of the method first. Okay, now, can anyone think about the logic here? How do we know whether we call it add or subtract?
With an if condition.
Yeah, so with if, or we can use another control, another syntax as well. Switch, very good. So if and switch can make selection or decision, right? So what do we want to check?
The value of the operator.
Yeah, good. So let's say I'm going to use switch because we hardly use switch, right? So let's use switch. So switch, tap, tap. Okay, so what is the value that we're checking again? The operator, very good. So you can see this one here, this is the operator property. So you're going to check the value of operator, and then we are going to add the cases inside switch. So what is the first case? Plus, yeah. And then what do we want to do?
Initialize or invoke the add function.
Yeah. So call the add method. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then add the break. Very good. Anything else?
Minus.
Very good. So we can do the same thing again. Minus. And then subtract and break. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to do anything else at the moment. So you might want to add default and so on. So ideally, when we have invalid value stored in our object, then you might want to create an exception, right? So let's say if the operator is not equal to plus or minus, then we can trigger by creating an exception. So we are not going to do that yet. So that is just going to be the simplified version at the moment. Now, so let me ask you a question here. So if I don't want to change, or if I don't want to use void return type, so would I be able to do the same kind of operation by returning a value here? Would that still be possible?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's try to change that. So I want you to get used to different ways to implement this. Yeah. So let's make this into returning an integer, and then tell me what is incorrect with my syntax this time.
I'm not returning anything.
I'm not returning anything. So what do I want to return in this case? The result. So instead of storing that, I'm going to return the result of the calculation. So change that into return. So is that the right syntax this time? Yeah? Okay. Yeah? Okay, so this is what we want to do for now. And then the second one will be the same as well. So I'm going to make that into int and then return the result. Is that right? So we're going to return. And is that the valid syntax this time? Yeah? Okay. Now, there's something else that is happening in my code, and it's really hard to tell until we actually tested this. We have a logic error. Yeah, what is the logic error here?
It's not going to be putting anything results.
Yes, very good. So the result is not actually stored, right? So at the moment, if we work with addition of two numbers, what will happen?
It will calculate it, but it won't go to anything.
Very good. So it wouldn't store the result of the two numbers addition in the result field, right? So if you think again about the logic here is still missing. So where can we store the result? Can you show me what we need to do in the calculate method? Tell me what to do.
Oh, so
Parentheses result.
in case, it, like before add, let's say in case plus, we need to say result equal.
Yeah, so we can store that return value to result here. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So the one thing that I want you to remember again is your method returning a value or it doesn't return any value, right? So in the previous example, the method doesn't return any value. So this is what you do to call that method. If it doesn't return any value, then you don't have to put anything to store any result because there's nothing returned. But if your method returns a value, then usually what you want to do is to either store the return value, like this one here, or you can display that straight away. Now, if I try to display that straight away, like, this is not going to work yet, right? But I'm going to show you an example, something like this. This is going to give you a syntax error because I don't have label 1. What do you think about this code here? Displaying the result of subtraction on label 1 inside the calculator class. What do you think?
It's gonna work if we have label 1, but like, this method is only for calculating. Let's say we need to create one more method to make
So
it
if
clear.
you imagine that you do have label 1 on your form, is that a good practice?
No.
Why?
You're giving a method multiple things to do instead
Yeah.
of
That's what I'm
having
saying.
one.
Very good. Okay. So remember when we talk about coupling? Yeah. So in this case, you create dependency to the UI element to display the result, right? So let's say if the UI element change is not called label 1 anymore, we call that as label 2. So what do you have to do then? You have to make the changes in another part of the code, which is this file here. So we need to have a nice clean separation between the file that is responsible for the UI interaction, and that is usually the form1.cs file, right? And that is the one that handles all the UI interactions. And there's another file that's only responsible for the logic implementation. So if the logic for adding the numbers change, we don't have to change anything in the form1.cs. There's nothing to do with the UI itself. But if we want to make changes with the buttons and the labels, then we have to change that in the form1.cs file, but not in the calculator logic file, right? So we need to have really nice clean separation and have to give them single responsibility only. So this is basically coupling, right? So this is type coupling. We don't want that. All right, so that is the reason why. If you start looking at your solution, I want you to think about, are we actually creating dependency? So is this solution going to work with different user interface type? So if you think about our current logic here, the calculator logic can work for different type of applications. Imagine that this is a console app, or it's a web application, or Windows Form application, like this one. We can still do the same operation with different type of application. So that is what we want to aim for, right? So you have pure logic only in this case. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Like if we store the result in the add and subtract, would we change anything?
So if we put the result in here, like before,
No,
Yeah.
no, no.
sorry, in this one,
Return result equals.
return result equals, or if you put return in here, is that the one?
You know, put the return inside the add and subtract. We
Mhm.
put return result equals first number.
In here, if I do return,
No, no,
Or
no,
in the
on
method?
top, on the top.
yeah,
In method add will subtract after return space result equal first sum plus second sum.
if I change that into result equals 2, is
No,
that what
you keep the
answer?
return
Yeah,
and then you put the space.
yeah.
Result equals.
Ah, okay. Can we do that?
Yes, we can,
Yeah.
but
Okay. So what is the difference this
Yeah.
time?
Between putting the and putting the calculate.
That is right. So you're storing the result into the result property first, and then after that you're returning the value. So in this case, what will happen if I keep the same code here?
gonna have the same value stored multiple times?
Yeah.
No, but then you remove the,
So if you remove this one here,
yeah,
yeah. Okay, so we could do that if you want. Another way of doing that. Yeah.
so it'll be the same
Mm.
thing.
So the end result will be the same, right? So which one do you think is better?
I think it'll just switch case.
Yeah.
Calculate.
Okay, so yeah, you're looking at two different things happening in the add and the subtract method this time. So you're storing and then you return, right? So do we want to perform a couple of operations here, or do we just want to do one? So we try to minimize the responsibilities as much as we can, right? Even though it's not a wrong code, it's still correct. We still have the right syntax, it achieves the purpose, right? So I would say maybe we just go back to single responsibility as much as we can. So the result is going to be returned here, and we don't have to store at the same time, yeah? And then in here, we are going to store the result. Okay, now the good thing about adding all of this in here, so if let's say I want to change my property, it's not called result anymore, I call that as result 2. So which method needs to be updated?
Calculate.
Calculate, right? So I only need to update this one method here. Now, if I still have the original code like before, result is equals to, and then again result equal to. So how many different methods you need to modify? 2, right? So you need to start analyzing and comparing. So which one will help you to reduce the repetition and make it easier to maintain as well? Can everyone see the different things that we have to look at? Yeah? Okay, good. Alright, so guys, how do we know if the code that we have here is actually correct?
Run it.
Run
We
it?
can't because like classes
Or you
are
can
not
have
using it.
Yeah.
tried it.
So what do we need to do in order to check? Test. How do we test that?
First of all, we need to create an instance of this.
Create an instance. Very good. So a class by itself doesn't really do anything, right? So we need to create an instance of the class in order to be able to test the methods. Alright, so we are going to do that in the form. So go back to the form. Now, the way that we are going to add the test is not going to be by adding buttons and so on. So as soon as the form loads, I'm going to add the code for testing. So right click your form1.cs.
Instead of doing that, you are using that.
Yes, that's what I'm going to show you next time. Yeah. So right click the form and then you choose view code. And we are going to start adding the test here. Now, have a look at your Form1 class. So Form1 class has the Form1 constructor. So the constructor method of your Form1 class will call another method here to create all the components and display them on the form. So we are not going to worry about that one, but we are going to add our test here. So let's just add a comment first that says test. And then we are going to add the code in order to test. So how do we test that? What do you write here? Create an instance. How do we create an instance?
So calculate space.
Yeah,
Yeah. Equal new
yeah,
calculate.
or C.
Yeah, whatever name.
Yeah, whatever name. Okay, good. Okay, then C dot first number equals, yeah, and then, okay, any value that we want, is that right? And then what do we do next? C dot. Do we need to set something else?
No?
No? Operator? Yeah, equals to? What is the type again?
Character.
Yep, good. So let's say we are testing the plus first, yeah? And then what do we do?
So C dot.
C dot, calculate. Okay, good. And then,
Sending for the
yeah. Okay, let's try to display the result first maybe for this one. What do you think? So let's put that on the message box. Message box dot show and then C dot. How do we get the result? Okay, and what do we have to change? Tell me what to do.
See results. Dots.
Convert to string. Very good. So what is the type of result? Yep. The result is an integer, so we need to convert that to a string. Okay, so dot to string. So to string is a method to convert your value to a string, right? Okay, so that is my first calculator object with those information there. So one of the things that I want to ask you in this case, what do you think about the accessibility to all of these properties here? Should we be able to get and set the first noun value from outside the class?
Yes.
Yes. Should we be able to get and set the second noun value? Yes. What about the operator?
Yes.
Yes. What about the result?
Yeah.
We don't have to set it, we only need to get it.
Very good. We don't need to set that. We only need to get it, right? So there is a chance if you are if you are using the set in that property, you are going to make the data to be invalid because you are allowed to set the result at the moment from outside the class. Is that right? So what do we do then?
So in class, I'd say we just removing set from the operator.
Okay, so inside the class here,
Oh no.
We
Do we
separate the
remove
getter
that?
and setter, and we put the getter as a public and setter as a private.
okay, good. So we cannot just remove the set here. Why we can't remove the set?
Because it's automatic property and it's the structure of automatic property.
Not because of the syntax, because
You're never gonna store the result.
very good. Because we need to use that property to store the result in that class, right? So what do we need to do to make our set to be private?
Change the private.
Private? Good. Set. So your get could be public and then your set will be private. Is that right?
No, you can do this.
If I make the whole thing private, what would be the problem?
I have access from the sorry, from the in calculate when I don't have access to the
Result. Yes, so we cannot get the result from outside this class, right? Okay, good. Excellent. Alright, so how are we going with that one? All good? Yeah? Okay, so once we set that to be private, that means we can only change the result inside the class, but not outside the class. But we can get the result from outside the class as well, right? Okay, so go back to the form. Now, let's try to check that. So if I do this c.result, and then we try to set the value to another value, right? So let's try to see what it says here. Try to set the result, and it's going to tell you that we cannot use this because the set accessor is inaccessible because we make that to private. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So these are all a matter of, refining your design, making that better. So we are talking about hiding the complexity, and in this case, this is more about encapsulation, right? So you're protecting the data. So which data should be protected? So how do we protect data again? Using private keyword, right? Okay. So,
In this case, it doesn't say that we cannot change the result on the.
yeah. So you don't have to be able to, the same thing as what we do in the private fields, right? We can still change the result inside the
On the
class.
description and thing, it doesn't say that
Yeah.
we cannot change or not.
Ah,
So,
yeah, it doesn't say. That's interesting because the teacher might say, I want to make the student think that 5 plus 5 is 11. So I can change that into 11.
well, he can bribe me, so.
Yeah. Alright, so that is good point. So if it doesn't say, then you don't have to protect that. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, excellent. Alright, so guys, how are we going with this one? All good?
Yeah.
So we're going to run it and then test that with the plus operator for now. Okay, so is the result correct? Hopefully. Yeah. Alright, so if you want to try to create another test, So you can use the same values, change the operator, and then recalculate, and then display that again, right? Or you can create another object here. So being lazy, I'm just going to change the operator, and then recalculate, and then display. So if you want to display the other values as well, you can just put the C dot first num and then C dot second num to display on the message box. So you can display all the other information. Okay, so the first one should be the result of addition, and the second one is the result of subtraction. Okay, so are we okay with the testing part? Yeah? So the testing part is not really automated at the moment, right? So it's very tedious. You have to copy paste and then change the values and then try to type in different values as well, which is not really easy to maintain. And that is why we are going to look at unit testing next time. So how do we automate the testing, right? Okay, so that is basically the end of testing. And everyone okay? Yeah? Okay. All right, so guys, so the next thing that we are going to do now is to create our second class. So the second class again has a single purpose. It's for saving. So what do you want to call that class? That's a tricky one. Choosing a name.
Save result.
Save result, yeah? Okay. So what is a class?
Blueprint.
What is a class? It's a blueprint of what? Why do we have a class?
Objects.
Yeah? Don't give me textbook definition. What is a class?
That's the way I understand it. I'm sorry.
What is a class?
It's this. I won't use a textbook definition.
It's a set of
Create objects.
It's a way to create objects.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Given set values.
Yeah?
It's a definition of
That's ChatGPT.
it's a definition or a set of instructions that any user of that class has to follow.
Okay, good, yeah. That's good. I like that. Yeah. So, if you think about the class, we talk about the definition, right? So, what do we have in a class? So, usually we have data. We are talking about, fields, and then we can access the fields using the properties, of course, in C#. And then we also have operations, right? So, a class is not just about a single item. It's not just about, let's say, one operation or a single field, right? So usually you have multiple members. Now, if I say my class is called save file, what is the issue with calling that class as save file?
Well, save is an action item. It's an action, so
Yeah.
it sounds like it should be the name of an operation instead
Very
of
good.
a class.
So that should be a method of a class,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in this case, what would be a good name to use?
Store.
Sorry?
Store.
Store? Is that an operation or is that, usually we choose a noun. So what name would you use? And just remember again, if you make it too specific, then you cannot really add multiple members inside there. So let's say if I'm keeping with that, save file class name, that means I can only add a method to save. I cannot later on add another method to read the file, right? So I'm restricting myself with the abilities of that class. I can't do that. So we should be able to do more than one thing. What would they call that?
So we're creating this class mainly for interaction with files such as written or
That
saved.
is right, for the file operations.
Right. So I'd say it's
Save every file.
no, it's more like set.
Should be a noun. It should be a noun.
Could be a noun.
Yeah, sure.
Alright guys, come on, think. Now, what's the purpose of the class? What kind of information are we storing here?
File editor.
File, very good, yeah. So file something, file operation,
File
File
operation?
op.
File
Yeah, that
save.
sounds great.
File save, yeah. So okay, so maybe not save because we might want to create another method for
File
reading as well.
operations.
Yeah, file operations,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so let's make it into simple. I'm going to add the class now. So let's add the class to the project and then we call that as, let's say, file op. Make it short. Okay, so that is my file op class. Okay. Alright, so how do we define this? We know we need to create a method in order to save the information. Is that right? Okay.
So
Mm-hmm.
we need, I'd say, we need fields such as results, address to the file.
So what fields do we want to set here?
Let's start with address to the file, like reasonable.
Okay, so that will be the path here, string.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but results of calculation, like just results of no. Can't really say that.
Okay,
Why not? Like result.
so the fields, what do we need to store here?
Oh, data. Just a data to store.
The data to store
Yeah.
here.
Uh,
Okay.
return value. I'd say if we want to read from the file.
Okay, so let's tell me fields. What kind of data do we want to store here?
Result,
Result? What result do we want to store here?
calculation result.
I'd say just the data. Data
Yeah.
to store.
Okay. So if we want to write the information to a text file, a CSV file, for example, right? What kind of information do you want to write to CSV file?
Oh, ID. Let's start with ID because like we need to find it somehow. in
String.
this.
Yeah. What kind of information? So what is the purpose of storing that to
The
CSV?
student ID,
Maybe
the
object
values,
with
the
ID.
first number, second number, and the results.
Okay, good. So we need to know the first number, the second number, the result, the operation as well, right? So we talk about student ID, so maybe later on we can add the student information there as well. So there could be another class called student, right? But at the moment, we haven't really got that requirement yet. So let's say we ignore that. So the teacher doesn't need to know which student who put in all these details, right? Now, so we need to store the information about the calculation into the CSV file. So every time the student type in, let's say, number 1 and then plus number 2, and then click the button, it's going to add the two numbers and then store the result into the CSV file.
We use
So
it
that is
without
what
the
we want
ID.
to store.
We can
Yeah?
inherit from the class, calculate number 1, number 2, operator, and result. That's all the data we need to store.
Okay. So that is one way of doing that. Should we do inheritance here?
Yes.
File of inherits from calculator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why not?
Okay. Can anyone think about a disadvantage of inheriting from calculator?
Mm,
If you change
Unnecessary
the calculator,
relationships.
change as well, then
I'd say.
Yeah.
Well, a calculator, I mean, the operations are not,
It's not a calculator.
so I wouldn't inherit from calculator.
First
And
number,
I don't
number
understand
to
why
do
you would
four.
wanna
Because
make this class inherit
First
from
number.
the calculator.
repetition.
Thank you.
They do completely different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like repetition. Like
Okay.
we have number 1, number 2, operator, and result. That's all the data we need to write into our file. We can get it from the calculator.
So,
But you're gonna,
yeah.
you're gonna take the methods as well, so you don't need the methods.
That makes
Okay.
sense.
So the reason why inheritance is suggested is because you want to reuse the information from the calculator, right? Because you want to be able to access the first name, not first name, first number, second number, and so on. That's why some people will say, why don't we do inheritance so we can access all this information from the other class? Now, so if you use inheritance, it's going to create type coupling. So what does that mean? If the calculator change, it will have to affect the file of class as well. Now, what is another way to get the information from calculator without using inheritance?
Create
Great.
same fields and like something else if we want to like
Calling
do
the
other
method.
operations.
Calling
Calling?
the class. Create a new instance of the class.
Yep, okay. So we need to get the calculator information. So we can pass the calculator object to the file of class as an argument to your method. Can we? Yeah. So if we just pass that as an argument, then you're not really creating inheritance. There's no coupling at all, right? And what is the advantage of doing it that way?
There's very low coupling.
Yeah, very good.
The advantage is that when you pass an object from a different class into this class as an argument, then you don't have to write all the code, all the fields one by
You're
one.
not gonna
It
change
passes
the
the
value.
entire object.
Very good, yeah. So you're going to get the encapsulated information. So that is one entity that you're going to use inside the method, and reusability. So this method can be used from different kind of projects, different classes. So it doesn't have anything to do with the calculator. Maybe you can even use this method in order to save the data from different type of objects later on as well. So depending on how you write the code, right? So we can make it really generic in this case. Your method could take an object type argument. So it doesn't have to be a calculated object. It could be like a really base type object. And then in your method, you're going to do the type check. If your object is a calculator, then you're going to store the information about calculator. Or we can just say call the toString method and then save everything that the toString method says needs to be saved. Right? So again, it's really up to you. Okay, so not having inheritance is actually a better solution in this case. So inheritance again is supposed to be used if you have common information and you want to be able to override, and then later on you can have your own implementation. So inheritance again is more about type and a subtype. So in this case, file of is not a subtype of calculator. This is an extra feature that we want to use. So we can create another class, and this class is going to work with your first type of your first class's object. So this is going to be your relationship between the two. Now we'll talk about the type of relationship. Let's just create the method first. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a method that doesn't return anything, right? Okay, so we're passing the calculator object here. Call that as C. Okay, now, what else do we need to do? Can we use CSV helper to write the data, the calculated object data?
Yeah, but we
Yeah?
need to add it.
Okay, so I'm also going to add the condition check here, guys. What if C is null? So what if we pass a null object? So we might not want to do anything, right? So let's just check that first. If C is not null, then I'm going to use CSV helper in order to write the data. So tell me how we can add CSV helper.
To go to the project, is the nugget package and nugget.
Very good. So we right click the project, manage NuGet packages, and then we go to browse, CSV helper. Okay, good. And then
Next.
yeah, install. Then next. Oh, there's no next there. Okay, and then I accept. Okay, so we install the package first, and assuming again we already read all of this information here, right? Okay, so how do we know if this is installed already? Yeah, so it says uninstall, or you can go to the install tab and then double check that there, yeah? Okay, so once you have installed that, let's close the package manager, and then what do we do next?
Add the using.
Add the using directive, very good. So add using, and then what is the namespace that we are using? CSV helper. Good. Okay, so add using CSV helper, and then what else do we need to do? Alright, so we have the two options. Do we want to write the header, or we don't want to write the header to your CSV file?
Not really.
Not really, yes? So what is the default?
Default is with headers.
Very good. So the default is always going to add header to your CSV file, right? If we don't want to have the header, what do we do?
We're creating them ourselves, indexes, let's say, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think there's the option no header.
Yeah, so we can get the option no header. How did we do that last time?
Heading something
And
else.
yeah, no header.
I think we're just going to get to the document.
You had the path.
Yeah.
Is it the path, comma, use no header or something?
Very good, yeah. So that is from the documentation, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so we don't have to memorize anything. Let's just do this. Okay, we need to create the config object. So the type of the config object is CSV configuration. So CSV configuration, and then after that, we are going to pass the argument here. So the only argument that we must require is the cultural info. So what is the culture information that we used last time? What is the standard one that we use? Culture info. And then if you can't use culture info, what does that mean?
Not invariant.
Yeah. So
I
have to
forget
look
what-
at the argument here. So the first argument is required and the second one is optional. So when you see the argument inside the brackets, it's optional. Now, the first argument is a culture info type. So what is the namespace for this class?
CSV configuration.
Look at the namespace on the
Yes. Okay, marking out.
System
Yes? System dot
globalization.
globalization. Now, every time you're using a class that is not within the current project, because it's not accessible, then what do we need to do?
Add it.
We need to add the namespace. Very good. So use the using directive in order to be able to access the class by the name. Now, if you don't want to add the using directive, you can always do this as well. Watch me. If I do system dot globalization, right, and then you can access all the classes in that namespace. So that is the long way, right? So if I don't want to type in the fully qualified name of the class, because I might want to use this class multiple times in the code, then otherwise I have to keep repeating the same thing multiple times. It's too long. So the easier way is to move this into my using directive list. So using system globalization, and then once we have added using system globalization, then it's going to allow me to access all the classes in that namespace by the name. Right, so that is what I want to use, and then which type of cultural info that I want to use? Which one is the standard one that we use?
Invariant culture.
Invariant. Very good. Okay. Alright, so is that all that we need to do? Or is there something else I need to do? We need to set the option here. So this is the one that Fernando mentioned before. Yeah. What is the name of the property to set no header? H. Yeah, equal to false. Right? So we don't want to have any header. Okay, so that's what we need to do. And then we are going to save. Save to file using CSV helper. so there are a couple of objects that we have to instantiate first. So what is the type of the first object? What is the type of the second object?
First is stream reader, next is
Yeah, very good.
CSV reader.
So first is stream. Is that reader or
Stream reader.
And
Was it reader?
It's right.
writer?
oh yeah.
Stream writer, because we write it, right? So we are saving.
Oh,
Stream
okay.
reader is for reading as well. Okay, good. So we need to instantiate stream writer, and then after that, what is the second class that we have to instantiate? CS3
Writer.
writer. Very good. Okay. Now, so remember again, every time we work with any object that can be disposed automatically, what is the better way of disposing them automatically without calling the close method? So we have, we have objects that can be disposed automatically. So how do we dispose them automatically?
Next record.
Yeah. Remember, we used to call the close method in order to close the string. But then in the last example, I mentioned about not doing that way. So we don't have to call the close method if we do this way.
Ah, they're using.
Using block. Very good. So we can add the using block in order to make sure that your object will only exist within that block. So once you go outside the block scope, then it's going to dispose your object automatically. Now, so let's do that. So usually what we do, we have using, and then we have the brackets, and then we have the object instantiation, right? Now I'm going to show you a newer syntax. The newer syntax doesn't really need to have the nested blocks. So we can simply just declare the object without using the block scope. So I'm going to talk about the scope after this. Right, so let's just finish with this syntax first. So what is the path? Let's say I'm going to store that in here. Okay. So if I want to, I can add another argument, and this is going to be the result of appending the result. Do I want to overwrite or do I want to append in this case? What do you think?
Append.
Append, yeah? Because we want to keep recording the student's calculation, is that right? Okay. All right. Now, so let's have a look at this first, and let's have a look at the issue here. Oh, why do I call that a string? String writer, sorry guys, string. Alright, are we okay?
Yeah, I believe first we don't have this file.
Yeah, so that is going to be created, because when you write, then it's going to check if the file exists. If it doesn't exist, it creates one for you. If it exists, then it's going to append the information.
I
Right?
probably did something wrong.
Okay, so
It's
yeah.
not right string. If you put like the way it was string right.
Yeah, it's literally the same. It's just maybe
String.
yes, string.
string.
Yeah.
Like to write in a file, I need to use string. I can't use.
No, because if it was before string.
I was talking about like my playing around with the CSV helper.
Okay, so have a look at this example now. So I'm adding the using syntax here, and the purpose of this is actually to dispose your object once they are outside the scope. So what is the scope of the writer object? Which block that this object exists?
Right now in
Inside?
the if.
Inside the if block, very good. So the scope of this object is only within this block where you declare that, right? So once we go outside the block, the object is going to be disposed automatically. So the easiest way to do that is basically adding using. So that is using block in order to dispose the object automatically. Now, it only works for those string operations type of classes. So anytime you have any class that works with strings, then you can use that using block in order to dispose that automatically. Alright, so let's create the second instance the same way again. Good. So I create the second instance, and this is my CSV, and that is the name basically, and then create CSV writer. Okay, and we are passing a couple of arguments here. So the first one is going to be the instance of your stream writer, and then the second one is a configuration, right? Okay, so CSV writer again is a stream type of classes, so that means you can interact with stream, so you can use that using block in order to dispose that automatically. So what is the scope of CSV object?
Same.
The same, very good. So once we go outside the if block, the CSV object will be disposed automatically. Alright, so what I want to do next is basically just writing the records data into the CSV file, and then after that, we are going to also write a new line. So that is what I'm going to do. So let's do this together. CSV dot write record. Okay, so what are we writing? The value of C. Then we'll talk about what will be written to your CSV file. And then, in order to create a new line, we can call the method called next record. So every single time, we are going to write only a single record at a time, and that is going to be on one line. So your calculator object's data will be written on one single line, and then we go to the next one after that, right? Now, we are going to see incorrect values at the moment. Is that right? Not sure?
What is C?
Okay, let's try to do this. Let's try to test that. Are we ready to test?
If I put the async is only for the web version or?
The async operation? Yeah? Usually we use that for that. Okay, so are we finished, guys? Yeah, what's happening?
Does make sense?
Did you put it in your system? So it's just configuration. CSV attributes type.
Did you find the problem yet? Alright. Yeah, so is that okay now? Alright, so moving on to the next part, right? So if you look at this class here, I created the class with one method, and this method is to save the information to a file, right? So that is the method purpose. So what is the purpose of the file of class? The file of class contains operations to work with files. So I might want to be able to read from a file and add that method into this class later on. So remember again, it's only about the file operations. Are we going to store some data here? Are we going to store some information in the file of object? Or we're not going to store any data? So that is the next thing I wanted to consider.
So they ask you, what did they ask you? This for the desk, you are there every day or?
Yes, yeah.
So, I think it says.
So you have to select all the days if you want to say every day.
Already occupied, right? You have to say if you used or.
I
Say for,
think so.
because if
But
you
yeah.
do this,
Mhm.
like all available days,
Yeah.
it's not. I
Then
think
it's going to select all.
then
Otherwise,
it's
you
available.
can click on.
No, so I'm already occupied. I have to say it's occupied, right? What did he ask you?
You just say, are you here every day? And I say yes. Okay, so they already occupied, so that's only for you. Oh, okay, so I think this one is basically says if it's already occupied, then it's going to change the color. But at the moment it's not occupied any day.
So this is
So you
already
need to
occupied.
select.
If you say available, no one is using, it's available. That's the thing.
Yeah, so you need to book for that. So that means you have to select all of the days. Because the way they look at that, they need to know in the system if you're using that every single day, right? So at the moment they say they're still available every single day, that specific days. So you have to select the days that you're using the days.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a bit confusing.
I know, it's very confusing.
Okay, thanks.
Alright, so guys, so do we need to store some information in this object, in this class? Yeah,
Yeah, we have to create an
Yeah.
instance and
we need to create an instance, okay?
an object instance.
So if we just create an instance and this instance doesn't need to store any data, right? So in this case, there is no need to actually create an instance in order to call the method of the class. We can change this method into a static method. So when you create this as a static method, you don't have to create the instance, you can just call the method using the class name. Now, think about the purpose again. So I'm going to make that into static, so let's have a look at the difference this time. So this is a static method. Okay, so why do we create calculator with instance methods, not static methods? Why? If you go to your calculator class, why do we have instance method and not static methods? Why do you think that is?
Okay, so we don't have to create instance, just invoke this method.
Yeah, so that's right. So in this case, the file op doesn't need to have an instance created. We just need to call methods, and we don't have to really store any data, right? So there's no data to be stored in this case. Now, it could be different scenarios depending on what you want to do with the design. So maybe you can say, hang on a minute, what about storing the file path and the name of the file, right? So that could be one of the fields that you want to define in this class. If that is the case, then you can either use static methods still, and you make your file path to be static data. So there's only one copy of the path in the file.
Generate automatically the name?
Yeah. Even just storing that. Or let me show you what it looks like. Don't type this in, guys. So I can do something like this. I can make that into a static string file path and file name, for example, and then that could contain this information here, right? Does it make sense? So I can define a field, and this time it's a static field. So if I want to do it this way, right, then in this case, why do I use static here? Can I just remove the static? Do we need to have multiple copies? So do we have to have different file name for each file operation?
No.
No. If we don't want to have different file name, then we have only one copy of the file name, and that is why we have static. Does that make sense? So if you define that as static, so the static data can be accessed from a static method and instance method. So this method can be static or instance. But how many copy of this method required? So do we need to create the instance of this class in order to be able to call the method? So that is another thing you have to consider, right? Now, so I'm going to change that back to the original design, right? So the reason why I make that into static is because I want to show you in some cases you have class that only contains static methods. So usually we call this as utility class or helper class. Why do we call them as utility or helper class? Because the purpose of the class is just to help other classes to complete their operation. So it's not about storing data. It's about helping the operation of another class. Yeah?
So if I want to choose, every time I say I want to choose the name of the file, would it still be static?
Yeah, so if you want to be able to store or to choose the name of the file, you can do that in two different ways. you can define that as a static field, right? If you want to have the same file for all of the different operations, or you can create them as instance field. So there could be different file, right? Or you can even pass the file as an argument as well. So you don't have to store it anywhere. Yeah, so we have different options. Alright, so I'm going to stick to this design for now. So this class is only going to provide some utilities. So this is going to help other classes in order to save information. That's it. Alright? Okay, now, so guys, have a look at this class again. In order to call the save method, we need to use the class name, not the instance name. So we don't have to create any instance at all, right? And pass the calculator object, and that's it. Now, so watch this. If I go back again to my code before, so go back to form1.cs. So once we perform the calculation, before we display that on the message box, I'm going to save my calculator object. So how do we do that? How do we call that method again?
So file op dot save, I guess.
Yeah, good. And then
And inside here we're just putting
C. Very good. So that is my object, right? Okay. So if you want to save the second one as well, then you can put that after the next calculation, and then you put file op dot save, and then the current data that is stored in C. Now, what is the logic problem at the moment? Run it and then check that. Okay. So try to check if you can find the CSV file.
yeah,
Yeah, and then check the content of your CSV file.
like position of the elements.
What do we have in that CSV file?
So 10, 20 plus 30.
Is that good?
Not really.
Yeah.
But we don't say which one.
We can change the.
So we don't know which one. Yeah, good. So in that case, you might want to add the header. Is that right? Okay. So.
Add the third empty.
Yeah. All right. So guys, this is just to give you an example about how we design the classes, right? So remember again, when you start working with your project, I want you to start considering all of that. But how did we start again? We didn't start by writing the code straight away. We started by designing that. So what does that mean? You create the class diagram, and then you're going to analyze that first. So try to identify the members of the class, how many classes that we need to define, and then after you finish with that, then you implement in the code, right? So that is just to give you an idea again. Now, when you start designing, usually you don't come up with the best design straight away. So you're going to compare that with other design, and then you're going to see which one is going to be more suitable for your requirements. Yeah. So we talk about, highly cohesive classes. So do we need to have highly cohesive classes, and how do we implement that, right? Okay, so that is just to give you an idea again. Now, any questions so far? Yeah? Okay. Alright, so guys, if I ask you to design the UI here, so you have 2 text boxes or 3 text boxes, it's up to you, and then you can add and subtract, right? Do you think you can do that?
Decorate the site.
Yeah, so how do we design the class, the user interface here?
Oh yeah, it's that.
Labels, buttons, text boxes. Yeah? Okay, so give it a go. So it's up to you how you want to do that. Remember again, this is for kindy
You're
students.
just calling otherwise you have to create a new
So we need
instance.
to make it simple for these students, kindy, right? So how do you want to design the form?
Output. Okay, let's go.
So what?
Yeah,
How do you
so
want to
you
design
need to
the form?
design the form, and then make sure you implement all the operations for each calculation as well.
Text box.
Yeah, we can have text boxes. How many do we need?
Xbox is gonna show the
Two.
output or not?
Yeah. So it's up to you. So design that. Give it a go. Yeah. So So you can have 2 text boxes, 3 text boxes. We can have a drop
3.
down if you want.
Number,
Are
character,
we-
number.
Yeah, so it could be 3, that's right. Number, character, number. What happened, Jake?
Nothing, I just got cramp in my forearm.
Oh, that programming.
Are we setting the tasks? So like we saving tasks, or I mean like we're using existing tasks, or we just regular calculator.
So when you say regular calculator,
I mean like just enter first number, enter operator, and the second number you see the result. Regular calculator, always like backspace with the task, and there you have to like.
that's the part that we have to decide. Which one do you think is easier for kindy students to use?
Let's say like when they give you a task, you just need to enter
Yeah?
your result.
Okay. Then design it that way.
Okay.
Alright, so it's up to you. Yeah.
Here you go. Save.
So every time you're using any class, right? That is not defined in the current project, that means it doesn't belong to this current namespace. So the namespace is defined in that project. Now, in order to use a class that is not in that namespace, that is defined somewhere else in a different namespace, then you have to add the using directive. And this is what we call that, using directive. So we can use a specific namespace. Now, what is the purpose of using directive? To be able to access all the classes in that namespace without typing in the full directory. So another way to type in this class is basically to put system.localization dot then the class name. But imagine if you have to use culture info class multiple times in a row, you will have to do the dot name for this. So this is just to minimize the confusion. So you can use it directly, so you're using any of the class inside here. So you can put this the name without worrying about anything else. Now, the same goes for any of these packages that you install. So if you have any package that you install, then that package is already defined within the namespace. So you need to add the namespace for your classes. So what's the class that is defined in CSV Alpha? CSV Python. So that is one of the classes. So what is the namespace for CSV Python? So usually you go to the documentation and then you can see the namespace for that class. But this also here is very smart. If you don't know the name of the namespace for that class, you're going to type in the class name and there's a schedule. You can just right click on that and then choose the suggested option. And it's going to add the using directive. Alright? So there are 2 different ways to know what we have to do. Either go into the documentation or then you can use this option in order to add that automatically. Okay? So that is why we have the using directive. Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay. Now, this one here is coming from the documentation. So if you go back to the CSV Alpha documentation, it will tell you how do we instantiate a new CSV writer. Right? So the CSV writer can be instantiated in different ways. So this method here, the constructor method of CSV writer is overloaded. So we have multiple versions. So if you put your mouse over there, it will tell you there are different ways to create this object. Now, so this is one overload, so that means you have 2 different ways to create the object. The way that we create the object is the one that has the 2 arguments. You need to pass the string for the object, so that is what we did first. And then the second one, if you were to add some configuration, so that means we are not going to use the default way of writing the data. Because every single time we are working with a library, usually they allow you to use that as is without changing any of this implementation, right? So you can write the data the default way, or you can pass some options as well.
Is there a drop down list in Windows Phone?
So if you want to add an option, you can create a configuration.
Yeah, Fernando.
So this configuration object is actually a CSV configuration type. This is not part of .NET library. It's not. This is part of CSV Alpha package. then
var
the type
is, var means variable.
you can declare in two different ways. So you can have explicit declaration. So explicit declaration starts with the name of the class or the data type and then the name of the object. Or you can use implicit declaration, which is using var. So if you want to make that into explicit, you can put the name of the class here instead of var.
Right.
So that is what we call as explicit. So we explicitly define the type of this object. This one is implicit. Right? So it doesn't matter, you can use either one. So you can call it yes. That is right. Any name at all.
It says new instance of this class.
That is right.
Why do you use configuration instead of alpha? Is that because of
So this is a namespace.
Mhm.
This is a class. You can only instantiate a class,
Oh,
not a namespace.
okay, yeah.
A namespace is basically grouping of classes.
Okay.
So you cannot instantiate that, or you can instantiate a class. And then this constructor has an argument, and the argument here is cultural info type. So you have to pass a cultural info into this constructor. So there are different ways, or different types of cultural info that you can pass, but this is just using the default one. Now, I know that this is confusing because actually this is setting the property value of the object to be false. So without this code, that is your object already created, right? Then, if you want to set the header to be false, in another statement, without using the curly braces, so you create another statement that says config dot has header record equals to false. So that is setting the property with that name to a specific value. So if you set the property at the same time when you create the object, we call that as initialization. So what we have here, we declare the object, and then we instantiate the object, and then we initialize the object. So there are two parts here.
We declare the object, we instantiate,
Yeah.
and we set.
Initialize.
Initialize.
Yeah. So initialize means set the default value to the property.
Okay.
So that can be done in three statements. Imagine this, var config semicolon. And then second statement, config equals to new, configuration, right? And then last statement. So you can create the object and then semicolon. And then next statement, do the config dot property equals to the value of the object. So that can be done in three statements. This is called
So
initialization. Alright, so I'll see you then on Friday. Oh, don't forget the homework, Adam. So when you come in on Friday, first thing that I want to see is the homework. Yeah? So part one. So if you look at the student drive, did you copy the files there?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So just make sure you look at the HW file.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll talk about that again. So this is basically just object that you created and then it has a value set to the property. So you're passing that object to this construct. So the way that we write now is based on the configuration that we set, not just using the default configuration. Because what is the default configuration? It's right in the header. So in this case, we don't want to write header. Alright, see you in a minute.
What is it that we need to write as
So that is the way we construct CSV writer. CSV writer requires you to pass a string writer. So that's why we have to do it first, so we can pass it. So we have to do it. Yeah. Oh wow, we have this one, we have this one, we have this one. And yeah, that's it. We have three objects. Right? And then we include this one, then four. That's it.
But then, oh, these two methods within
CSV writer. So what is this? CSV writer. So this is a method of CSV writer and this is Alright, so guys, you can save the changes and then continue at home. I want you to remember again, try to implement the button click. So I'm assuming that everyone uses button, right?
Yeah.
In this case, so maybe one or two buttons. So try to make sure that you implement each of the operation. Now, I want to see something that is easy to use. So when you come on Friday, show me how you implement that. So each of the button click is going to perform the operation, display the result, and don't forget to save the result as well. So the code in order to do all of them already in your file. So if you go back to your form constructor, you can see how we did that, right? But this time we're going to put that to the UI. So give it a go. I want to see your implementation on Friday, and let's see who has the best UI for Kindy Kids. You can change colors as well, change the size of the text. You can use different UI elements. It's up to you. Yeah.
Shant. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Two questions. One to do with this.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know how to show it.
Okay. So there is an error, and that is most likely the reason why it doesn't show. All right. Can we try to build the solution? Okay. Something to do with your package. Try to close and reopen again.
Yeah, it's happened every time I try to use Windows Phone.
Oh, is it?
Mm.